Okay, you're all set.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the special town board work session for Friday, April 23rd, 2021. The purpose of today's work session is to discuss potential legislative changes to the form-based code. And today's meeting will be facilitated by the town's Director of Planning, Sabrina Charney-Hull, as well as Town Council, Jennifer Gray. Can we get a motion to open up the work session, please?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you again for taking the time to meet this morning. There are really 7 areas in relation to the proposed form-based code that we've identified that you need to have more discussion on, or more consideration. These areas are areas that have been commented on during the public hearing process of the DGEIS, and they're areas where each of you have indicated you like to see refinement. So we're going to start out of the 7 areas, start with, and Jen, tell me if you think this is a good idea, to start with the public notification process and the review process, board review, approval, and public hearing areas. I think we could probably talk to them, all those first 2 items in the documents you received at the same time. And so the intention of today's meeting was to really discuss what goes on now versus what the proposed code proposed, and then talk about what some of the comments were, not in a lot of depth, but talk about a new direction based on what people have felt or said. So when it comes to public notice right now, if there's an application for development, whether it is a zoning board variance or a planning board application, adjacent or abutting property owners are notified. There's no, 500 feet from a property line that notification is sent out. It's just those abutting property owners or those adjacent property owners. Under the draft form-based code, we kept that adjacent or abutting property owner notification. So that was something that, we kept the same as it is today. People wanted more say. These were the comments during the public hearing. They wanted area-wide notification for projects, particularly in the Chappaqua Hamlet. Suggested changes were additional notification, maybe a publication in the paper with a public hearing process on certain projects if they were to occur within the hamlet. And getting to that certain projects, that really starts talking about process. So, and again, I'm going to kind of just go through this first part. We can talk about any questions you may have. When we talk about process, what is the process today? Today, we have a process where it includes board's approval. There's a public hearing that's required if a project goes before a planning board or a zoning board. Every meeting of the zoning board is a public hearing. The planning board sets a public hearing at the time that they feel the application is ready for public review. So there's a difference in timing between the 2 boards. An application in the hamlet now in our business retail and business retail parking zoning districts, if there is a change of use to what is called a more intensive use today, gets submitted through the planning board. Okay, if you wanted to change residential 2nd floor use to a commercial use, it would be considered more intense. If you wanted to change a 2nd floor commercial use to a retail use, it would be a more intense use. Within the code about intensity of use, and there's 4 qualifiers that need to be examined in relation to an application for a change of use in the business districts. If you cannot satisfy all 4 conditions that are in the code today, your application will go to the planning board for site plan approval. The draft code said, you know what? In the form-based code area, there should be no board approval or public hearing required, that there would be an opportunity to come in and speak with professional staff and log your concerns for possible changes. The community did not like that. They said that they wanted to have more involvement. They wanted to have public hearings. They wanted the planning board's involvement. They wanted the environmental review board's involvement. They wanted the architectural board's involvement. So suggested changes are to create a combination of an administrative review by professional staff, which would be similar to what it is today, where applicants meet in a pre-application process. There would be a checklist regarding a complete application, and that's really what we call a threshold verification. Does the application measure up to all of the standards and the thresholds established through the environmental record that is contained within the DGEIS? If the project involves a re-subdivision, meaning you're combining lots that are greater than or equal to a minimum of a ½ acre, the application would then be sent to the planning board for a public hearing and approval to occur within a 60-day timeframe. Variances and special use permits would remain as they are today in the code, to be handled either by a planning board, a town board, or a zoning board of appeals. If there are environmental permits, they would remain with the professional staff who are charged with implementing those specific codes, and that's trees, steep slopes, stormwater, and wetlands, unless there are environmental permits involved with a re-subdivision of a ½ acre or greater. And then that's kind of the genesis of the proposal that we worked on to try and mesh all the comments that we received. I'm going to share with you some mapping because I think it's important for you to understand the size of properties in the hamlet. So or the size of properties. I'm going to focus on Lower King Street. I can share with you Upper King Street if you're so inclined. Hang on 2 seconds. Let me know if you don't mind when you can see that. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here is the map of Lower King Street, right? This is the Lower King Street study area. If you look at the size of properties in Lower King Street, you can see over 50% of them are 0.25 acres or less, right? Up to 2.5 acres. There's very few of them that are greater than 0.25 acres. We've been talking about activation of the North Greeley corridor, immediately in relation to the form-based code as opposed to the entire area. I'm going to try and zoom in. Let's see if I can do that with all of this. So you can take a look at the properties. Can you see those sizes? 0.1 acre, 0.1 acre, 0.1 acre. It is very difficult to redevelop a 1/10 of an acre property, okay, with today's requirements of stormwater controls, of parking requirements, and affordable housing requirements. So in looking at North Greeley, there is a subdivision, meaning a 0.2 acre property, right? They could probably do something, not a lot, but something. But all of the 0.1 acre properties located towards the top of the screen, they would have to re-subdivide to really do any project that is meaningful. So we looked at the size of those properties and said, you know what, if it rises to the level of a ½ acre and involves moving these lot lines, that's when the board should have approval property. That's when there should be a public hearing. So that is the proposal that is before you. And the public hearing process of a half acre relates to the public notice. We can do one of two things. When an application comes in, we can notice it in the papers, post it on the website. When there's a public hearing, we automatically notice it in the papers and publish it on the website. So I'm going to stop there on those two items and kind of let you provide some feedback, ask questions. Jen, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I think you gave a really nice overview of those first two topics. Of course, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right. And
Can you pull up that map again?
sure. Can you see it?
So we're discussing reinvigorating or reintroducing the planning board as we discuss if a half an acre or more, correct?
A
possible scenario.
re-subdivision of a half acre or more.
So to clarify what that means.
Sorry, what does that mean? A
Right.
re-subdivision?
Meaning you're changing a lot line. If you
So-
go,
So
If you have
want,
an existing property that's a half an acre or more, the Rite Aid property, for example,
correct,
then that doesn't go before the planning board?
correct.
Wait, does go in front of the planning
No, I
board.
thought you said
No, it does not.
combining two properties would
It
go
doesn't.
before the planning board.
Yeah, a re-subdivision is a lot merger, taking two or more properties and merging them together to eliminate the lot lines. So
So
what
why would we propose this only for a re-subdivision and not just for all properties that are over a half an acre?
Well, the question was whether or not you want the planning board to retain decision-making authority over all of the projects within the hamlet. Because of the very few, because the majority of the properties are small.
Understood, but some of them are not small, some of them are large. And when
Right.
they're large, why wouldn't we want, my understanding of the feedback that we got from the public and the conversations that the town board has had to date is that when it is a project that is of, a substantial size, that is the moment at which we would want to be able to reintroduce the planning board and the public hearing process. So I was a little, thank you, Jeremy, for asking this question, because when I was listening to you, I wasn't clear that you were only proposing it for when there's a re-subdivision, so there's a combination of lots.
Right. I was under the direction based on previous conversations that there was a desire to merge the administrative review with a board process. Because the nature of a form-based code where you detail where the building should be on the lot, right? If you look at the dimensioning that is in the proposed code, it takes away the subjective thought process of redesigning the location of the building on the lot. Whereas if you're combining lot lines, it's creating new lots.
Sabrina, when did we have this discussion? I don't ever recall discussing this as a board.
It was direction that was provided throughout this entire process. Different comments that board members have said since the beginning of the process versus where we are today.
So where
Sorry,
did this
go ahead,
proposal come from? I'm just don't understand. Did you
I
just
was asked to
decide
come
this
up.
is what made sense?
I was asked to come up with a proposal that meshed the two. And in reviewing this, this is a proposal. If the board is in favor of doing anything over a half acre or greater and sending it through the planning board, then that is fine. I was asked to come up with a combination.
And Lisa, I've mentioned this in public comment and conversations. So it's not, it's something that's been said, but my at least from my position, I think that when you are combining lots and you are, there is a concern that you're creating a bigger space or creating bigger structures, that we do bring back the planning board. I think the question that we have to decide collectively is whether we think it's just a size issue or an aggregation issue. Meaning, if it's multiple lots, when does it get triggered? Or alternatively, is it just based on the size of the lot, or both,
Yeah, and if we're bringing back the planning board, which I am 100% in favor of, we don't actually need a form-based code.
Well, that's the question. So,
Or the point, we should get rid of the form-based code and keep the planning board in.
Okay, but there's
No,
still
so-
many reasons to have a form-based code beyond just the involvement of the planning board. And the question that's in front of us right now is the one that Jeremy just defined. So
I
it's
think
gonna-
also something to keep in mind is that there's different levels of involvement of your planning board and your architectural review board, your zoning board. There's different levels of involvement that you can talk about having those boards have. Right now they have full involvement that they have from start to finish. They're involved. They're involved from the application submission time through the end of the process when an approval is issued. There's form-based codes that have been developed where the planning board is still involved, but it's not involved necessarily by issuing an approval and starting the application from the get-go. For example, I know Lauren has mentioned the town of Malta a lot. The town of Malta, in their form-based code, what they do is they've rolled in the planning board to the process to hold a public hearing after town professional staff has vetted the application to make sure that it does comply with all of those parameters of the form-based code, that are in the legislation, so that there's a little bit less discretion there, but still an opportunity for the public to come in, give public comment, and be involved in the process, and still an opportunity for the planning board to provide its 2 cents to a certain extent. But then it goes back to professional staff to close out the approval process. So there's a lot of different ways that you can skin the cat, so to speak. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that.
So Sabrina, I'd like to ask just, a lot of the goal for this legislation is to decrease the time in which developers or business owners go through the application process. So can you give us a sense of, where we are today, like on average, let's say like the Rite Aid project, how long would it take in today's process versus what you're proposing in the form-based code?
So typically when an applicant comes to us today, it's very much dependent on whether or not the applicant is responsive to the requirements of the town code. Okay. Oftentimes they are not. When they go before the planning board, it's not only the requirements of the town code, but the direction that the planning board is providing. We've had lot line changes where you're erasing a line or moving a line that that are done within 3 meetings. Okay, an introduction meeting, a public hearing, and then a resolution. Projects like 91 Bedford Road, which was completely zoning code compliant, there were no variances to be issued, took 3 years to get through the process. Okay, so I can't give you that time frame because today's codes aren't as specific in relation to the placement or the form of the building as compared to the proposed code that you are engaging right now.
But
That's
also,
the difference.
Jennifer, can I just finish my question? Because it's important. But Jennifer or Sabrina, like with a form-based code, have they published like what the average timeline looks like? I mean, there has to be some sort of precedent or, model that we can look to, because I guess what I'm hearing from you, Sabrina, so 91 Bedford took 3 years. Is that start to finish, or is that just the approval process?
That's just the approval process.
Oh, okay. And then with the form-based code, do you have like a sense of what a range would be? Would it be a year, 3 months, 2 months? I mean, what do you guys?
In looking at this, right, if there's a checklist, and it will take some time to develop a checklist that measures up to whatever the final code is, that checklist is going to be so specific based on the code requirements that, I would say within 30 days, you would have professional staff review, administrative review of the project.
Mhm.
In speaking with Jen and kind of working on our proposed process, we were calculating a 60-day review of a public hearing to give the board enough time to open a public hearing, notice a public hearing, then give the public an opportunity to come back. But that 60-day threshold, and Jen, I'm going to ask you to speak to that, the timeframes around that.
So there's no magic to the 60 days, at least from a legal perspective. Obviously, you need to have the at least 5 days for the publication in the newspaper prior to opening the public hearing, and then any amount of time that you're going to set for mail notice or sign notice. But the 60 days, if you think about the fact that the planning board meets twice a month, every other Tuesday, 60 days allows potentially for 4 meetings of the planning board for the opening of the public hearing and then continued sessions of that public hearing. So it does give a lot of opportunity for the board and also for members of the public to participate.
And Jen, if you could just, I'm sorry to jump in, just explain again what the role or rights of the public in these hearings in terms of their ability to dictate or control what happens currently and in the future, because I want to make sure people understand when we hear the role of the public, what that means and what people are quote unquote losing or gaining.
Sure. So the purpose of the public hearing is to obviously educate the public about the project and allow for members of the public to lodge their comments, to give their comments to the planning board. In our current system, the planning board, as the decision maker, would listen to those comments, take those comments into consideration when it's ultimately making its discretionary decision on whether to approve or deny the project. It's not like a popularity contest. It's not if a majority of the public comes out against an application or in favor of an application, that the planning board is necessarily, obligated in any way to vote in accordance with the sentiment of the public. It's the planning board is not a legislative body. It's an administrative body, so it has code requirements that it has to go by. Ultimately, a decision of the planning board has to not be arbitrary and capricious, meaning there has to be a substantial and rational basis in the record for the planning board's decision. So, for example, in the traffic realm, traffic is always, the hot button issue. So if you have a traffic engineer saying that a particular project is not going to create significant traffic impacts, but yet, a majority of the public comes out at the public hearing and is concerned about traffic and disagrees with the traffic engineer, ultimately, the planning board, having a professional expert give their opinion that there will not be traffic impacts, it would be arbitrary and capricious for the planning board to deny that project based on the public's opinion. So it's an opportunity for the public to express their sentiment and comments about the project, but it does not control whether or not a project is approved or denied.
Sabrina, I have a question back to this lot line movement gate, let's say.
Okay.
I think I remember, certainly remember this proposal being made in discussion. I remember Jeremy asking about this. And I was thinking that the reason for that being the potential gate was that for a given existing property line, what could be built on that property would be entirely determined by the code.
Correct.
Right? We're predefining everything. And so there's not a whole lot of flexibility to do something that would be beyond the scope of what had been envisioned for the property. But then once a property line is moved, right, then we get into a territory that could reflect something closer to like the full build out, right? Because the full build out scenario assumed the merging of property lines. And
Correct.
So how do you prevent the full build out scenario? You include a higher level of oversight and public input when the property lines are merged.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. That directly in relation to the full build out was based on a combination of properties, not one property, but several properties in several areas. In the DGEIS, there is a consolidation plan, which, you know, identifies those properties that were combined to reach the full build out. This measure of stopgap, in the sense of sending it to the planning board for approval, is something to prevent the full build out without the public being involved.
Got it. So if that was an endpoint that we were trying to avoid, this is a measure to do that.
Correct.
Sabrina, can I ask a question about on the suggested approach? When it comes to a variance and special use permit, why would that be applicable to the form-based code?
Because of the size of lots, and
Okay.
maybe there's something that we don't know, because we're talking about legislation. We're not actual on the ground looking at a piece of property and where the building goes in relation to the code. There may be a need for a variance. So instead of a 10-foot side yard, that they can only do an 8-foot side yard, right? Those are typical scenarios where the zoning board would issue a variance for that 2 feet.
I see.
And also, just to add on, by law, you have to provide a variance process. So there has to be some kind of relief valve for properties that, you know, because of irregular lot size or some other difficulty.
Right, we may have a stormwater system that runs across private property that we now need to work around, and they want to put a building up. How do we negotiate that? You know, does it fit within the code requirements, or are variances needed?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's situations that we just don't know about until you're actually looking at developing a site.
So Sabrina, with that being said, then where did the half an acre come from? Wouldn't you want to have the planning board intimately involved in any lot line, you know, when you're joining any lot lines then? Because that argument that there may be something going across one property could happen regardless of the size.
So in looking at the size of the lots in the hamlet, right? I looked at a half acre because it was more meaningful. You know, if you combine 2/10 of an acre properties, you're still only at 2 acres of a property. Just for perspective, 91 Bedford is on a 0.8 acre property. Okay. The Rite Aid building is on a 0.8 acre property. You know, so I was
Village
looking.
Yard, for instance, I think that's only 0.3.
Hang
I'm
on.
pretty sure.
Did you say the Village Yard?
Yeah. I thought I saw that was 0.3.
Yes, the village yard is only 0.3.
Right. So that's a significant development on significantly less than half an acre. So why wouldn't then the planning board should be included in everything, which essentially gets rid of a form-based code for many reasons.
Again, this is your board's discussion. I provided you with a suggestion.
I know. No, I know. But that's why
I don't have, Lisa, I don't have answers for you. You know, one of the questions that came up is why not anything that's equal to or greater than a half acre? You're now looking at a 0.3 property saying, what about a 0.3 acre property? Right. There's also an opportunity to identify significant properties, right? If you feel that the village yard has community significance, you can identify certain points within the hamlet as needing a higher level of review.
But then how is that? I'm not attacking you. I'm putting.
No, I get it. I'm just trying to provide you with the plethora of options, right?
But if we do that, right? If we're picking and choosing properties then we're saying, and if you combine properties that we haven't picked, across lot lines, then what is the point of the
Well,
form-based?
I did, if you notice that the proposal before you is not to identify properties, specific properties, right? Because
Right.
it doesn't, there's no sense about that. My proposal was half an acre because I thought that was reasonable given existing lot sizes and watching what has happened over the past, for me, 10 years, for other folks in my office, 20 plus years of the inactivity regarding certain properties, the difficulty certain properties have today. So that's why a half acre was chosen for me in trying to give you the best guidance possible based on existing understanding of what happens under the existing code and understanding the restraints and the concerns you have about reaching the full build out
Yeah.
under the
I
new
just
code.
know I'm a visual person. So like, I know I grew up on a quarter of an acre. You could build a pretty substantial building on the property that I grew up on. So, and that's only a quarter of an acre. So this just makes me.
Right. And the kind of three qualifiers that I want you to have in the back of your mind are the need to provide parking. We have not gotten rid of parking requirements. The need to factor in stormwater controls on site, okay, which all require land
Mhm.
and increase cost, and the requirement to provide affordable units pending the size of a development. So those are all three things that are external to the building construction that property owners have to build in. The village yard at 0.3 acres, it has been subject of applications before the planning board over the years. They have difficulty there with traffic circulation on that property. Traffic circulation to meet today's standards. They have to combine that lot with the lot behind it and potentially the lot in front of it or to the side of it in order to satisfy traffic. Combining those lots would bump it to the level of the planning board. But at 0.3 acres, given the requirements of the form-based code, it will be very difficult to do anything substantial there.
But they could right now under the current proposed form-based code and the proposal you're
They have
giving.
had difficulty.
But
They've
they
had
could
difficulty.
knock the whole thing down if they wanted to and put something else up there that complies with whatever's going to be in the form-based code without getting the planning board improved in the current scenario we're discussing, correct?
If they are doing a completely commercial project, yes,
Great. I mean,
it would be
that's
a building
terrific.
permit.
I mean, I don't see the issue here. Clearly, and I'm glad, Sabrina, you sort of built that out. There are so many requirements and pieces. Let's not think, and which people do, unfortunately, and I do it too. I visualize a building, lot line, taking up that whole space. You can't go underneath to build parking. So there has to accommodate physical space to make sure the parking is there. So that 0.3 is not a usable 0.3 acre. So by default, it's going to be grabbing or when I say grabbing, there's going to be agreement or not with the neighboring property to make that physical space bigger to accommodate it. If they can build something there now, although they haven't done it in years, then that's terrific. We want them to enhance that property. I use the church, that's the old church that's next door, the old Lutheran church. That's been abandoned for as long as I can remember. I've been here for 15, 16 years. 15 years it's been abandoned. That would be terrific if they could build something on that lot line in compliant. But keep in mind, again, it's not a 5 or for that matter, say a 4-story building or a 3-story building. They have to be able to accommodate the parking. So among other things, and you said the stormwater. So I think there's a misconception. I'm not saying you have it. I can say I visualize it. That lot line to lot line is all of a sudden now we can just squeeze a building there. It doesn't really work that way. There's so many.
No, I'm saying there is a building there now. So I just want to understand if that's occupied. And I don't know why it has to be all commercial. Right now, there can be residential in those buildings.
But it would be a change of use. Like there can be residential in those buildings. Right now, you said today, if the exact same thing was going to be built, all commercial.
Under the form-based code as proposed.
Under the form-based code, it would go through whatever process you're speaking about. Today,
That's what I don't understand.
Today, that property has had difficulty satisfying parking requirements. Okay, so, if they are tearing down the building and building a new commercial building, they need to satisfy parking requirements. They cannot do it on that site. And when I say parking, it's not just parking, it's circulation of vehicles on the site. Okay, so so anybody who has looked at that property has needed to consider other properties to help with that circulation on site and to make it cost effective.
So Sabrina, if we're to follow this example, and 3 of the North Greeley 0.1 acre lots were merged to create a 0.3 acre lot, could the village yard be built under the form-based code?
On North Greeley?
Yeah, if you took 3.18, like, with the restrictions of the form-based code,
I think you would, because of the depth of those properties, you would not be able to create the village yard.
Okay.
But if someone could figure it out, they could without having to go before the planning board.
Today, you would need to go before the planning board because
Under
it
the
involves a
FBC.
subdivision. Under the FBC, it would be, I think it would be challenging to satisfy the requirements on a 0.3 acre lot. Again, look at 91 Bedford on a 0.8 acre lot.
I think it would be helpful to go through what Sabrina and Jen put together as it relates to the review process versus talking about hypotheticals, because I just think that we got to get the process right. 3 years is unacceptable, honestly, in my mind. If it took 3 years to build my house, I would not be a happy resident. So I think that if we just, you put on here, Sabrina, that like, in the pre-application meeting, like what are these steps? Like, can you run through like what the process looks like? Because I really want to get a sense of what you guys are recommending so that we can just go through what actually could happen and what you're recommending. You know what I mean? As it relates to what you think would be the most professional and efficient way of doing it.
All right, so the pre-application meeting, you all received a draft Word document that kind of outlined this, and Jen, if you would rather kind of go through it, let me know. Step 1 is a pre-application meeting, and this is where professional staff will meet with the applicant, and we'll review the proposal for early identification of areas of concern. Right? This is pre-application meeting happens today when applicants want to go before the planning board. We don't just put our applications online. We require a pre-application meeting so that when the application is submitted officially, it has all of the things that are needed for the board to consider its requirements in relation to the code. This is the same type of pre-application meeting between myself, the town engineer, the building inspector, the environmental coordinator, and the town attorney if needed. And the intention is to, at this time, share with them the code, the application checklist or the code checklist, the forms that they need to allow them to take that information back to their team to identify how they should shape their project. So if this meeting is also used to determine whether or not the proposed project is consistent with the requirements of the code, if variances might be needed from the get-go, if it's a special use, what would be. At this pre-application meeting, the applicant would be reminded of the height requirements, the bulk requirements, the form of the building, architecture, and all those other details in the code. Once this step, the pre-application meeting is concluded, the applicant will come back with an application that will go through what we call an application completeness review. Okay, under the proposed code, this was a schematic review. the purpose of the application completeness review is to actually check the box that the proposal meets the requirements of the code. Okay, it allows for a more detailed or a substantive review by professional staff to confirm that the application meets the requirements and to identify for the applicant which requirements have not been met. Okay, if there are requirements that haven't been met, it's an opportunity to discuss waivers or variances. And at the end of this process, the application will be ready to seek a building permit or fill out a building permit application. All of this requires forms to be developed. We have a pre-application checklist today that we use. We would rework that existing pre-application checklist to be more applicable to the form-based code area. And then we have a secondary checklist that it addresses completeness review. Does the application meet the requirements of the code? So that's kind of the two-step process that Jen and I have kind of thought about in relation to what do we do today? How can we change it for underneath the form-based code to meet the requirements of that code? Under step 1, pre-application meeting, if an application comes in and involves a subdivision of properties that are equal to a half acre or more, the process will change. We will carry out step 1 and step 2, and then it will be submitted to the planning board.
Right. So I think in picking up there where Sabrina left off, I think the idea is where it would require review by the planning board if the board were to accept this recommendation about a half acre re-subdivision lot merger going to the planning board, or under the current scheme of the form-based code where the planning board is retaining special permit review authority, that application wouldn't go to the planning board until professional staff has confirmed that it meets all of the requirements of the form-based code. So a lot of that sort of quote unquote heavy lifting work would be done by professional staff, making sure that it is in conformance with the code. That's also where, if you're talking about different options for getting the planning board involved or not involved, that would also be the point at which you could have the application, no matter what the application is, referred to the planning board for a public hearing process to allow for public input at that time, once professional staff has confirmed that everything meets code. I also want to mention this process doesn't cut out referrals. So under the existing draft form-based code and under this proposal, all referrals required to Westchester County Planning Department, to emergency services, those will all continue to happen as they do today.
So Sabrina, in the pre-application process, what does that look like? Does like a business owner or developer come in and show you like a schematic design and basically kind of like at that point?
It varies, Lauren. It varies. Okay. Today we have pre-application meetings with applicants every other Thursday, unless they need a different time, where applicants come in and some of them show us their idea. This is what I was thinking about. What would I need to do in order to do this? Or do you think, is this code compliant? Like, that's the general sense. Mm-hmm. Other applicants have come in to a pre-application meeting and they're ready to have a form and submit the application. And it really depends on how far along the applicant is in their planning, whether or not they've looked at the code, they're familiar with it, and it depends on the type of project. Just yesterday we had an applicant come in who owns several lots, and he said, how could I create one big lot here? Is it possible to do that? Can I have additional dwellings on one big property? What does the code say? He was looking for a code interpretation by professional staff, whereas other applicants have come in with a pool, for example, on their properties, and they want to get approval from the planning board to site the pool. Well, there are codes and requirements like development coverage or building coverage that oftentimes sends them to the planning board for approval. When we look at that application, we talk about what would be required to obtain an allowance of coverage requirements. What type of mitigation? Is there any way to reduce their coverage? Those types of things. That's what happens today. Under the form-based code, that first pre-application meeting will be very similar to that. Some applicants may come in, what can I do with my property? And we say, well, here's the code. This is, the sections you need to look at. This is, the environmental review, go to this website, and it's really pointing them in a direction. Other applicants will come in with plans already. Does this meet the code?
But I mean, perhaps I was being a little bit presumptuous about a form-based code. Like, ultimately, the goal of a form-based code is to say, this is what we want the town to look like. Right. So before you even step your foot in the door, please don't show up with some like crazy.
It's not, it is idealistic. It is idealistic to think that will happen.
Okay.
This is that opportunity to have the conversation. If somebody wanted to build a net zero building and they were having difficulty meeting the code, it would be an opportunity for them to talk to staff and get a sense as to whether or not this is the direction the town wants them to go in. It commits them to a conversation as opposed to submission of fees and applications to enter a process.
Right. So you don't pay the fee in the pre-application meeting. You
no.
Do the next step. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And then as it relates to, I know with what we met with the Architectural Review Board, they're really concerned about limiting the styles, and we'll get to that about architectural styles, but there was a suggestion from the Architectural Review Board to have a representative at one of these points of processes, so that, if someone comes with plans or schematic plans that look that, whether it's contemporary building or traditional colonial, like someone who has that architectural eye would be helpful. What do you recommend for something like that?
Jen, do you want to talk to that? This is number 8. This is number 8 in your list of things to address. We've gone back and forth about that.
Okay.
Jen, do you want to?
Sure. As far as ARB involvement, there's a couple different options that you can have. I mean, one option that Sabrina and I had discussed was that you can have 1 or 2 members of the ARB, less than a majority of the ARB, involved in either the pre-application meeting or once you hit completeness review after the formal application has been submitted, to get that early input from somebody with that professional knowledge. You could also consider, having the team retain a consulting architect, to assist professional staff in doing that review if you don't want to get the ARB members involved. Another option would be to have a referral to the Architectural Review Board, where the application goes for a concept review before the full Architectural Review Board, and gets comments from the board that way. Another option would be you could retain ARB approval during the building permit process, to just as you do now, to have that full review and approval by the ARB. So there's a whole level of different options that you have.
Right. I think it's important also to note with the ARB, there were comments that there's the stylistic detailing in the code is too much, right? The thought was to take that stylistic detailing out of the code, create a packet to provide to applicants that contains that detail, right? To keep in the front part of the architectural section which talks about the general standards in architecture, but to take the stylistic detail and then add another category or anything else, or other style as deemed appropriate or something by the ARB or by the architectural consultant, and to use that as part of that application, the application forms, right? To give them a sense of what we're looking for without requiring it in the code. But also the form-based code provides the ARB more structure when it comes to architectural detailing than today's existing code, right? So whether or not the ARB review is maintained during building permit review or called for as part of an application submission, not a pre-application meeting, but an application submission, I think we'll still be in a good place to ensure the architecture is preserved.
Just if I may, I feel like we're getting a little bit off of the original topic, and I want to make sure that we're driving towards decisions as a, if we're going to talk about architectural details, let's finish the first part of the conversation and then move to that, because I just want to make sure that we get somewhere.
So then harkening you back, we're talking about the public process, a public hearing or not, and how that works, and the application process.
Sabrina, can I just ask, there's something I just don't understand about this whole process. Is this meeting to rewrite the legislation? Aren't we waiting for our consultants to come back with details and further research on all the questions? Like how are we rewriting the form-based code without all of that information that all of the residents, all those like hundreds and hundreds of questions that we're asking the consultants to look at? I just don't understand the purpose of this meeting. Is it to rewrite the code and not get that information? Are we rewriting it and still waiting for that information? Like what is, Jeremy, I kind of want to hear Sabrina's answer on this.
Oh, Sabrina's answer is our answer, not Sabrina's answer.
No, but I want to know what the point of this meeting is. Okay, so are you writing? Is that what we're doing? We're rewriting the code?
I think the point is very clear. Residents have asked questions. There's a lot of them we simply can't answer, right? Because they're substantive beyond our pay grade, for lack of a better term, that professionals and consultants are going to answer, experts are going to answer. But we know there's certain things that are consistent. One of the things that we've heard consistently is the role of the planning board. That has been something that has been stated. So why should we wait for certain things that we know we can deal with and address? Why do we need to wait? We have a lot to do down the road, and we can continue this conversation because we're not drafting the form-based code today. As you noted, we have to get the answers, but why not at least start addressing some of those issues that we can address that are constant in the big points? And one of those, for example, is the involvement of the planning board. So we have said in many different forums in these public hearings that if lots are joined together or if it's of certain size, then we should consider having the planning board to look at it and go back and say, all right, yeah, the form-based code may apply, but we want planning board involvement. So Sabrina has taken this opportunity to look at it and bring back what she's seen and heard from us. Say, what do you think? So I think, and I to a certain extent, I rely on the experts still, that when you look at the town, you look at the layout of the town, and you see how many of the units, of the plots of the properties are so small, I think whether you used a half an acre as a threshold for all properties, irrespective of whether you're joining them, or 1 acre, it's not going to make that much of a difference because there's not many 0.8, 0.9, 0.7 acres. It kind of hops up pretty drastically to above an acre. So if a half an acre is a threshold that we're using, I don't object to that, at least on its face now, with more information as it comes through, to say that when it's more than a half acre, then we need the planning board's involvement. But for all these smaller lots, because of the real issues that they're going to have to deal with, let them move forward. Let's make this more efficient. Let's not wait those 3 years just to start the process going to build your building. And I think it's a conversation we need to have now. So that half acre doesn't sound unreasonable to me when you look at the entire scope of things, but we'll wait to get more answers too from our professionals. But why wait?
Right. That's what I'm saying. I mean, I'm happy to have this conversation, but it's hard for me as a town board member to come to a decision like this is how I'd want this to move forward without getting that information from the
when it comes to the process question, and the public hearing question. The
Mhm.
consultant team is going to ask you, they're going to do exactly what Jen and I have done. They're going to suggest a process based on public comments, and they're going to ask you how you feel about it, what you like, what you don't, and how you want to change it, right? When it comes to things like, let's take the number of school children, right? We need to wait and see what that all ends up at. I can't ask you about that right now. You know what I'm saying? But this is a process discussion that is directly under your authority, and we need a sense from the board. We're not looking for a definitive, we're looking for a direction. Is that fair, Jen?
Yes, I think that's fair, because in formulating the responses to the FGEIS, you know, that they're going to be in the FGEIS, I think that professional staff and your consultants need to understand how the board feels about some of these topic areas so that they can appropriately draft their responses to the comments on these issues, such as process, what level the planning board is going to have in this process, if any, what level the ARB is going to have in this process, if any. Are you, you know, would you like to make some, you know, would you like to see some changes to the form-based code that was originally drafted to account for some of those public comments and to change the process a bit? It's very typical through the environmental review process that there are modifications made to the initial proposed action as a result of public comments. And this is the time when those modifications would be made as we're preparing the FGEIS so that we can fold those in. It's very much an iterative process as you go through with modifications to the proposed action kind of built into to that
Right.
normal process. So
And
I think yeah, so I think the purpose is just to get a sense, is there a consensus of the board? You know, what is the sense of the board as far as, you know, should we stick to the process that was originally proposed in the form-based code? Do you want to change that that review process for applications? If so, how, you know, what's a general sense of how you would like to see that changed? Again, not looking for, you know, definitive binding specifics, but just a sense so that we can assist the consultants in preparing those responses.
Right, and there's also, we talk about the planning board, that in some instances, there's also the environmental review board. That's all part and parcel to this as well. So, you know, just trying to get an understanding of where you're all sitting right now.
I've already spoken. I'm happy to listen to other folks, but I think this is the right concept to move forward with. And whether we include all acreage, all properties over a half an acre, or only those that combined that equate to over half an acre, that's something that I don't know if we have an answer from everyone on that. But I personally believe that, yes, what you're proposing sounds reasonable, and it gives the confidence to the community that you have the planning board involved in anything of substance.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Even if it's now more so it's not wasting time with the planning board, because it seems the process will still be expedited once you have the planning board.
Right. So with that in mind, I would prefer to have the planning board involvement, not only for the re-subdivision for a half an acre or greater, but for any development of a half an acre or greater. So any work to occur on a lot of a half an acre or greater. I think you made a really clear case for why a half an acre makes sense from your professional judgment. And so I agree with that as a recommendation, but I would like to expand it. And I appreciate that, that anything on a half an acre or greater lot would still need to be code compliant, and that we very much want to streamline our activities under the form-based code and in the form-based district. That said, I think we need to balance that with the concerns that we heard from the community with regard to retaining the role of the planning board. And I do think that half acre threshold will really speak to those properties that would have a significant change. So that's what I recommend we move forward with. I do think that having the specificity of the checklist and that kind of 60-day timeline on the public hearing process will help to reduce the time frame that a property owner or developer is looking at. 'Cause I am sensitive to the concerns that Lauren raised. I think she's exactly right that what we need to do is figure out how to shorten this process for people. But I do want to do that in a way that's mindful of the concerns that we heard from the community. So that's where I stand on this. And I look forward to hearing others' opinions.
I pretty much, I'm not sure if I'm still on the fence on whether there should be a threshold as it relates to what the development should be. I do genuinely believe that replicating what Malta and other municipalities have done in keeping the planning board as it relates to having a public hearing is imperative, because I think that that's an appropriate forum for folks to, communicate their concerns or communicate their, support for any project in the hamlet. I honestly, I go back and forth about the threshold, because I think it also matters the location of the project, being that I just get concerned if it was a project, hypothetically speaking, that was, going to block someone's view or not, if the project was just, even though it was less than a 0.1 acre, like I would just hope that it doesn't, negatively affect someone else. So I just worry about that aspect of it. That's all.
Anyone else?
All right, well, I think the planning board needs to actually be more involved. I think, given our discussion that the village yard is built on 1/3 of an acre, I think that is a large property, and I think 1/2 an acre is much too large. I actually think look, this is not popular, I know, with anyone on this board, but I think the planning board should not be cut out of any of the process, because I think that depending on the use of the building, there are going to be differences with parking, there are going to be differences with traffic. Even if something is built to code, it can affect people differently. I think that input of the planning board has been invaluable in every project I've ever seen. And yes, there are ways we can streamline that process, but I'm actually in favor of keeping them involved in everything. And at a minimum, I think 1/2 an acre is much too large, because I think that would give somebody, if they could, as of right, the opportunity to build another, let's say, village yard. And I'm only saying it, not that there's anything wrong with village yard. I'm just saying that so people can visualize size, because I need that. They could build that as of right without really needing the planning board approval, and that could be significant. That's a large development. And I'm not talking about maybe the way it's designed, but something of that size. And that would really concern me. So I think they should be involved completely. I know that's not popular here, but that's my view on it.
Well, but to go back to what we discussed at the top, the planning board isn't involved in every development today. So only those where there's a change of use of the intensity, right? Sabrina, can you jump in?
Today, the planning board is involved if there's a change of use. If somebody is taking a change of use that meets that does not meet the 4 intensity tests that are in the code today. For example, there was a project that was converting, which was adding more residential units to the top floor. That went before the planning board because it was adding more residential units on top. Where there was 1, there was now going to be 4. If the project is converting, if it doesn't meet the intensity thresholds, or if it goes above the intensity thresholds for a proper reference, the planning board gets involved. If it doesn't, the redo of what used to be Hall of Scoops, that did not go before the planning board. putting an air conditioner on or a generator on top of the village market went before the planning board. So it really depends on how the project measures up to the intensity of use characteristics within the code.
Exactly. And you have people like, let's say we're going to build something and it's going to impact the people at 149 King. If somebody decides they want to put a generator on their building, so now it's shorter, but now that's what everybody's looking at, I would think they want planning board to look at that and consider that. So I really think it's important not to cut the planning board out at all.
Lisa, I'm just curious, for the years this has been going on, why now all of a sudden you don't want you want the planning board in full effect? I mean, this has been a conversation for so long. What all of a sudden, like, what epiphany
Not
was like
all
now?
of a sudden. I've actually said I don't think we should have this form-based code now, since we've been able to actually discuss this personally. But I think the planning board has invaluable input. I always wanted them to be included. You know, the way this works, and Lori can speak to that, she's a scientist. You know, when you have a hypothesis, you gather all the data and see if it makes your hypothesis true or not. And if it's not, you don't make the data fit to the hypothesis, you change it. So, you know, to me, we gather data. I don't think it fits with the town. And now I think it needs to be changed and made sure that it's appropriate for our town. And that's why I'm in favor of the planning board, as I've always been. I've always said that I don't think they should be cut out.
So if I may, to try and move this forward, right? The only one, Lori, I don't know if you have any thoughts you care to share on these first two items.
So I do not have an objection to planning board involvement for the initial review of anything that is in this zone, whether it's 0.1 acre. I understand the philosophy behind the half-acre property line movement. But I think Lauren makes a great point that there are impacts of a new construction, let's say, that may not be fully appreciated until it's available for review. So I don't have an objection to planning board engagement at the initial review of a project.
Sorry, I'm just trying to take notes. Does that mean for a project of any size, or how does the 0.5 fit with what you're saying?
Oh, I was just saying I understood the point of what Sabrina had laid out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in light of what Lauren brought up, that there may be public considerations for smaller initiatives, and
Okay.
that we would like the opportunity for public review and comment for even a substantial project on an existing lot line, that it seems reasonable to include the planning board review at this application phase for
Regardless
any
of size.
new
Okay.
initiative.
Okay, I'd like to offer last thoughts regarding these first two items and move on to the third item.
If I could just clarify, just for my own purposes, just so I make sure I understand. When those of you who have advocated for having the planning board be involved in the process, I'm just wondering, are you speaking as that you would want the planning board to take over approval authority for the project, or to have them be folded into the process through like a referral and public hearing process? I'm just trying to gauge where we're at with respect to the level of involvement with the planning board when they are involved.
Jennifer, I think that's a great critical question.
Yes.
Absolutely. Right. I would be in favor of it as a vehicle for public comment and planning board comment. But if the objective is to bring the decision-making authority into the internal planning department of the town, sorry, I'm using the wrong words. don't know that it necessitates planning board approval. I think we want planning board input and public comment.
So just to clarify, right now, the proposal that is before you today, the changing from the way the code is written today, is that the planning board process includes a 60-day public hearing process. That projects of a half acre or greater involving a subdivision are approved by the planning board. Those other projects approved by the planning board after they satisfy step 2 of the process that I laid out.
So otherwise, if the planning board doesn't have that approval process, they're just kind of a consultant, who is approving it? Staff?
It is the way the draft process reads is that professional staff will take an application, compare it to the code requirements through a formal checklist process, and ensure that the application meets the code requirements. Because of the level of the detail in the form-based code regarding placement of building, parking spaces, the public frontage, the pedestrian way, and the parking, that there's not a lot of wiggle room as to where the building goes. So staff will ensure that it is code compliant prior to it going to the planning board. It is proposed that the planning board will have a 60-day time frame within which to hold a public hearing.
And then what?
They have to make a decision.
But who has the ultimate authority? Staff.
If it goes to the planning board will have the decision-making authority.
Right.
Staff are
Didn't
not
Jennifer
going.
just asked us? That's why I'm not understanding the question. She just said, do you want the planning board to have decision-making authority or not?
Right, you have options. I mean, that's what we're looking for the board sense, what level of involvement you want the board to have.
Right, I am referring to the way we are suggesting it. You may have other thoughts.
So Sabrina, in that model where it goes before the planning board, in a model where it goes before the planning board, there is a 60-day public hearing that results in public comment and comment from the planning board. What happens with that input?
The planning board will direct the applicant will make a determination as to what changes need to be made to the application in order to approve of it. The planning board will retain the approval authority if it is a project that goes before them.
Okay, so I think we're having difficulty between the two models that Jennifer is proposing and what you might be advocating for, or what you have suggested. Right.
So I am.
You could go before the planning board, get 60 days of public input and planning board input, but the deciding authority is staff and the planning board is not voting.
Jennifer, did you, in our conversations I don't recall a scenario where a project went to the planning board, obtained information, and then came back to staff to approve.
That is an available mechanism.
It is an available mechanism, but we were not recommending that.
There's a number of available mechanisms that the town board can consider, that being one of them.
But we were not recommending that process. I was speaking to the recommendation.
So if the planning board, so do we see a scenario where an application fits the checklist and all the criteria for form-based code, goes through this process, and the planning board declines to support the project? What would happen? They would have recommendations for the applicant to remedy something, or they would just say, no, this doesn't work for us?
Jen, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, it depends on whether the planning board is having approval authority or not. If the planning board does not have approval authority over the project and the application is being referred to them for this, comment and public hearing process, then the application goes back to department staff for final review and approval. Yeah, what happens to those comments? You can build into the code authority for the planning board to direct that the application has to be modified according to X, Y, and Z comments before staff may approve it. you can, in order to give some teeth to the process. Otherwise, it's comments for staff to consider, but they're not necessarily binding comments. So there's, we have some flexibility. We can build some teeth into that process where it's just the referral with the public hearing. But the process under which the planning board would have the most teeth would be when they retain approval authority. That's when they would retain the most control.
And if they said no, depending on the application and why they said no, the applicant would have relief opportunities through Article 78, that type of thing.
Yeah, which obviously is not the route we want to be going down.
Right, that's what I was going to say.
Sorry, Lisa, I just wanted to make the one point that any decision, just as the planning board now is subject to an arbitrary and capricious standard of review, they would still be subject to that under this new scheme. Any decision that they made would have to have a rational basis on the record.
Okay.
Do you think that the that the restrictions of the form-based code would make it kind of more challenging to have an objection that for a project that fit all of the criteria that
It's
had been
no different than it is today with existing codes.
Got it.
It is no different. There are codes. The form-based code has more specific details as to the location of the building, how much glass should be on the front of the building, how it relates to the sidewalk and the street. But in essence, it is really no different than today's code with the front yard side setbacks. You need to provide parking, all of that. Height. There's more specificity regarding architecture that's not there today. But again, it is a matter of process.
Got
it. For me, I think it's appropriate for the planning board to provide feedback, but as it relates to the approval, I think that ownership shall go through staff, primarily because I have confidence and trust in our professional staff who are ultimately, paid to do this job. And furthermore, are the experts in making sure that the code is executed, efficiently and flawlessly.
So Ken, how does that work then? The planning board gives a recommendation to staff? It's like, help me to understand. You've got a 60-day public hearing process potentially. You have 3-4 public hearings in that time, sessions in that time. You listen to all of the comments and feedback from the public. You consider the code requirements, and then the planning board writes a memo to Sabrina.
Basically those comments that are lodged during the public hearing would be considered by town staff in considering whether the project should be approved or disapproved. But those comments are going to have to be tied to code requirements, because ultimately if the project meets code,
right,
there's really not a lot of discretion. There's really no discretion as to whether to approve it or deny it. It's an opportunity for the applicant to work with town staff to make voluntary changes to the project, to address comments from the public and from the planning board. But again, if it meets code under this process, it gets approved. As I mentioned, we can think about adding some teeth to that process, building in authority for the planning board under that scenario to direct that certain comments have to be addressed before it can be approved by staff.
Mm-hmm.
But again,
I wonder, and tell me if this is a stupid question, but does that open us up to, if you're looking at Article 78 challenges where, somebody's going to say, this decision that the town made is, not consistent with the requirements that you set out in your form-based code, and you're making an arbitrary and capricious decision with regard to whether or not my project can move forward, and they're going to bring an Article 78 challenge based on that, is having sort of a process by which you've got a public hearing and you've got a planning board, and the planning board's writing a memo and they're making recommendations, and maybe there are certain things that they want to have satisfied before the town planner can approve the project. I just wonder if that's kind of making things too complicated. Like, is it making us more vulnerable in having a sort of convoluted process?
And some of those reasons, in addition to some of the other sort of complicating factors that we're talking through this process, I think is why staff is making the recommendation that if the planning board is going to be involved, that it not be just a referral process with an opportunity for public hearing, but that they then retain the approval authority, because otherwise it puts staff in a difficult position.
As your professional, not want to be put in that position. And I don't think any of my other professionals will want to be put in that position.
Right.
Yeah. It seems to me that the entire plan would just be a magnet for litigation, honestly. And I think the planning board has to be able to approve it. Otherwise, to Ivy's point, if we're giving them, if a form-based code is basically giving development rules and as of right, even if the planning board has ideas or the public has ideas of things they'd like to be changed, a developer does not have to change it under a form-based code. And then if staff didn't approve it, it would just be ripe for litigation. So I think 100% the planning board needs to be included, but then, query, why are we having a form-based code? If the planning board's going to make those ultimate decisions, and some of their decisions are going to fly in the face of what's necessarily in a form-based code, I'm not even understanding why we're having it.
Why would their decisions fly in the face?
Just change current zoning and still keep the planning board involved to make sure that traffic is appropriate, parking is appropriate, et cetera, for the individual use of that property. But that's another discussion.
I think that we should stick with what I support what Sabrina suggested. I think there's no issue if it's going to be a half acre, it's a half acre. It just sort of, you have to have some courage and belief in the system and belief that your professionals know what they're doing the right job. And I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect, I'm not a planner, but at some point we have to move the ball forward to make an efficient process so that we're not here where we are in 6 years from now, or 8 years from now, or 10 years from now. So I support what Sabrina has suggested.
Yeah, I think our staff is excellent. I'm not worried about our staff. I'm worried about for-profit developers who want to come in and not listen.
The same
they'll have as of right development on certain
developers who built Greeley and South Greeley and 149 King and the condominiums and our homes. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, stop making this sound like the goblins and monsters are coming to gobble up this community.
No, but they were subject to planning board review is the point.
And we're setting some of the standards and the basics now that we want to make this more efficient and what we don't want. And that's one of the whole purposes behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeremy, just to clarify, you're talking about the lot line requirement, the whole process for the planning board. Can you just restate where you are?
So Sabrina had suggested, if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Sabrina, that once you aggregate lots and you move those lot lines in excess of a half an acre, then it triggers that planning board approval or planning board taking the role it would have normally, so that it allows for more efficient use, and I use the term development, which seems to be such a scary, frightening word, to renovate and fix up and build out and make a usable, viable, healthy, inviting building on your 1.1 or 0.2 acres, knowing that, trusting what Sabrina is saying, that even at the village, why am I also drawing a blank? Thank you. Even there at 0.3 acres, it's just not practical to say that that size lot can all of a sudden build up and have the space to accommodate today's standards of parking and flow of traffic. It seems like we're just spinning our wheels here. Let's not be afraid of something that's not coming or really practically speaking can't come. So let's rely on what, and Sabrina is our expert here, and it's not to say that experts always are going to agree, but let's make this more efficient. If it's a half acre, it's a half acre. And if you look at the lot sizes that Sabrina shared with us, it's really a half acre. There's very few properties that are between a half acre and a full acre, meaning that the overwhelming the vast majority would be subject to this. So.
What's interesting about that just occurred to me is that you do have that threshold for planning board review, then that's an inducement perhaps to do something with the lot you have.
Right, because that assumes otherwise someone's going to have to come in and buy all those lots to make it bigger, as opposed to maybe you can work at something with you, local guy wants to share something with his neighbor and something, the two of them, and she has this lot, you have that lot, and you build something. It's not so easy.
Right, so that if you had the same restrictions for your 0.1 acre lot as you did it for a 0.3 acre lot, maybe you'd want to do something with your 0.1 acre lot because you wouldn't have, if the restrictions were the same, then you might as well combine and go for the biggest thing you can. But if you don't need planning board review to do something with your 0.1 acre lot within the boundaries of the code, then perhaps that would actually be an incentive for smaller buildings.
But if I may, the 0.1 acre lots today can do something with their lot.
So I don't want to cut off conversation, but I'm going to make a process recommendation, and feel free to shut me down if you feel like we should keep going. But I'm actually feeling like I'm hearing 5 board members saying 5 entirely different things right now. So I don't actually feel like we're driving closer to consensus. I just feel like we're all kind of we've got our thoughts, and maybe we need to kind of sit with them and what we've heard. And so I was actually going to suggest, in addition to taking a bathroom break, that maybe we should put a pin in this conversation, and maybe what we could do is write up a couple of additional options. So Sabrina, you came with one recommendation, and I appreciate that. And from what I'm hearing, it sounds like Jeremy is on board with your recommendation the way it was currently written, and I think he might be the only one, which is okay. But maybe we can spell out, based on the conversation that we've had in the last 90 minutes, what are those other options that we've discussed this morning? And maybe if we put them kind of down on paper, we can revisit this one on Tuesday evening, because I do think maybe we could continue to move forward. We've got a list of other items we wanted to get to, and maybe we can drive forward with those, with the understanding that we can revisit this one. How does that feel for people?
I'm fine with it. And to be clear, Ivy, I'm not disagreeing with necessarily what you're suggesting, which is the half acre lot as the base.
Oh no, you would never disagree with me.
For the record, I certainly would, but I think it has to be in that ballpark. But I'm happy to vet this more.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion to kind of lay everything out and stew on it. I think we're trying to work through these ideas, right, and understand what the implications of each of these different approaches is before we arrive, hopefully, at a consensus or near consensus. So I think that's good. Plus, I could also use a small break.
Okay, so everybody, how long do you want to take the break for?
I'll text you, Carrie.
5 minutes?
Men are
5
saying
minutes.
2 and women are saying 5. So we're not
Still here.
5 minutes.
Jill, I'm still here.
Oh, okay, good. I think we're taking a 5-minute break.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Are we ready to resume? Thanks, Carrie. Okay, if we're ready to be back, we didn't take a motion to take our bathroom break, did we, Jill? All right, we'll
I
just
won't
keep
tell if
rolling.
you won't tell, okay?
We'll just keep going. Sabrina, where would you like to take us next?
I'm sorry, Ivy, did we just ask for a time within which board members were going to take and submit comments on the review process? Do we want to just make a recommended time within which we get them, just so that we're in a position to talk about them on Tuesday?
So you just like everybody to write up what their thoughts are based on the conversation?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm thinking it's like a couple of sentences from each board member. Is that
I would think so.
so? Maybe end of the day today. Is that
It's
reasonable?
fine by me. Is that doable?
Would I give
Mr.
you a
Shaky,
homework
no.
assignment?
I just have meetings the entire rest of the day. Like, can it be by Monday morning? Or over the weekend? Just whatever, Sabrina.
Yeah, can we get it first thing Monday, just so that we can put it together?
Yeah. I can do it over the weekend. I just don't know if I can do it today.
Okay, that's fair. So Monday morning, 9 a.m. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, great. That's a little also help Lauren Kescom with the minutes. Great, thank you so much.
I'm not going to write like a dissertation though. Like it's really going to be a couple of sentences. The extension of the timeline does
No
not
more-
mean that I'm going to write a research paper on this. It's
How about
No,
no more than 3 sentences?
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
very short.
I would have given 5, but Sabrina's a taskmaster, so okay, distill it down.
I don't know. I was ready to write a publication-worthy manuscript on this topic. Feel disappointed.
Okay, the next item in your list is affordable housing. So I'm going to go through what our existing code today says, what is in the proposed code, what comments have been, and what the suggestion moving forward is. The suggestion moving forward is just that. Feel free to change it or write a couple more sentences. So in the BR, BRP, and IG zoning districts today, there is no affordable housing requirement. Okay. The only affordable housing we would see is if somebody came in for a special permit. In the draft code, there was a proposal that developments of at least 5 but less than 10 shall provide 1 AFFH unit. Developments greater than 10 units shall provide 10% AFFH units. People have said that they would like to see an increase in the affordability requirement. People have also said that they would like to introduce more workforce housing, a greater diversity of 30, 60, 80% of the area median income in affordability. They also have referenced the cupola building and the mixture of incomes at the cupola building. So it was recommended that we maintain what the county recommendation was, but if the board wanted to, we can make a change to introduce a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 workforce unit or some other ratio in relation to developments that are larger than 10 units. That is the existing, the proposed.
What does that mean? Introduce a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2.
So for every AFFH unit you have, the next unit needs to be a workforce unit.
So am I correct in understanding that the recommendation is that we continue to keep our requirement at 10%, but that within that 10%, we can stratify, have greater stratification of what is affordable versus workforce?
Well,
I think what Sabrina's saying is we'd have the 10%. So let's say, tell me if I'm wrong. Let's say there's
Let's
a
say you
building
had a
of 10
20 unit
units, there's
proposal.
one.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can we just, Sabrina, what's the, if you
So
had,
if you had a 20 unit proposal, right, you are required to do 2 units that are affordable, right? A 1-to-1 would be that one of those units was affordable anywhere, you know, a 30% AMI unit, right? The other unit would need to be a workforce and 80% AMI.
right. So we're not actually talking about, your proposal doesn't actually respond to the request to increase the affordability requirement.
Correct. It
Okay.
responds to the increasing the diversity of the type of affordable.
Okay. And why not?
What-
Why not increase the affordability requirement?
It was recommended by council, and Jen, I don't know if you want to add in here that we should stay with what the county recommends. That there's not enough information out there regarding increasing. You know, listen, I think if the board wanted to increase it to 12%, there needs to be a balance there.
So I'm not familiar with, I think maybe someone else from my office may have provided the guidance on affordable housing. I did not, so I can't speak to that. But certainly, you know, if it's going to, within the confines of the AFFH, the county model ordinance type affordable housing, yes, you should stick with what, you know, what the county guidelines are on that. But I think you have flexibility to add additional requirements beyond that for workforce. I can check with my office and see what additional guidance may have been provided to you based on that, though.
Right. So we've had I've had conversations with some of you about increasing that affordable housing requirement from 10% to 12%. You know, I don't know if you want to do it across the board or on developments of a certain size. The question is, what is the cost of that increase in affordable units? Because the affordable unit is a cost to a developer. And then the question is there an incentive structure that can be created regarding the increase in affordable units? And when I say incentive, it can be anything from height to reduction in parking, you know, or any other incentive that the town board would like to place to try and get an increase in affordable units.
So I'll close out my comment and just say that I'm very interested in that. And from my perspective, I'm not satisfied with this recommendation and just moving forward with this. I'm perfectly happy to institute workforce housing as a requirement and perhaps to do the stratification of the 10% as you're recommending. But if we do that, I would then also want to consider the incentive structure in some way. And I don't know if you and Jen can take that back and think of what those incentives should be, or if that's a question that we ought to be throwing at Kimley Horn. What are appropriate incentives that would get us over the 10%? Because what I heard back from the planning board, from Westchester County Planning Department, was that county model ordinance should be considered a floor, and that we should be thinking about incentives that take us greater than that floor. And so I don't want to, in my view, what's being recommended here is actually peeling back the amount of truly affordable housing that we would have under the form-based code, because you'd have some affordable units and you'd have some workforce units, but you'd still have that minimum threshold. So that's my perspective, and I'll stop talking now and let others weigh in.
I think we need to strike a balance, because no one is going to develop and grow and build if it doesn't, fit what they want to do in terms of that building and what they're going to generate. But I agree that we want to do it in a way that encourages more affordable. But I think lost in this conversation, not in totality, because people have certainly addressed it, is the workforce component. Doing affordable is important, but so is workforce. So you shouldn't forget people just because they're above that threshold, but certainly not necessarily can afford to reside in this community. So I don't profess to know the answer, but I do agree with Ivy in the sense that that there can be a mixture, but I do think we should increase it. And whether it's just 10%, making this up 10% affordable or 12% affordable, and on top of that, you would do them to 2 or something like that in terms of workforce. That's something that I'm open to, but you'd have to come to me with scenarios, but I'm certainly open to increasing both.
Sabrina, how hard is that while we're, talking about the FBC, how hard is it to put the current county requirement in our current zoning? Because it upsets me that 91 Bedford was built without needing any affordable housing because it's not in the current code. And there's another building that's going to be going up that was just approved that also has no affordables because it's not in the current code. So how hard is it to fix that right now in our current, so that if somebody, there's only a moratorium on a small area right now, so people can build. And
The
right
town
now,
board
as
would
of
need
right,
to
if
direct
they're
town
in this
council to
district-
draft legislation or amendments to the existing code to address that. And then you would vote on it, it'd go through a legislative process with you, and then you would adopt it.
I think that's important to look at.
Would that apply, however, retroactively to projects that have already been approved?
No.
And it still would have fixed the issue of getting people to come and build more and fix the downtown. It doesn't rectify that issue.
No.
Actually, if they're stuck with where they are now and they can't build up and build out, and they can't go higher than what they're allowed to make them additionally have affordable housing. If they're going to maintain the same structures or the same size lots, it's going to go nowhere.
No, but I think Lisa's suggestion is an excellent one, and I think it's something that we should pursue immediately. Because if we're shrinking the form-based district to only the North Greeley corridor, we're only going to be solving for that area in the short term. So the rest of the hamlet should be, in my view, as Lisa's suggesting, subject to that county model ordinance as soon as possible.
Where are you going to put? Where are these buildings going to be built? If you can't get them built now, where are they going to be built? I think this is why it's a much bigger conversation of just doing an entire district as opposed to North Greeley to make this applicable.
No, it's a bigger conversation.
Both. It's both.
It's both. It's saying that 91 Bedford was just able to be built as of right without affordable housing because it's not in the current code. So until the form-based code, whether it's adopted or not, is not going to be voted on for a little while. So I'm just saying, is it possible to change that now in our current code so that if anyone is building as of right on their current lot lines, that they have to incorporate an affordability requirement?
I think that's reasonable. I mean, I think, Jeremy, to your point, right, building anything on any other lot in town has all of the same complications that it has now. And adding affordable adds to that at some level in terms of the commercial viability of those things under the current zoning. But, it may not have a lot of impact, but at the same time, it would remove a barrier to the addition of affordable outside the zone we're considering.
Yeah, and
I think
like the
that's fair.
restrictive zoning that's currently existing.
I think that's fair, but I don't think we should have sort of delusions of what it's going to do for the community if we don't take an overall ability to look at this more holistically. So I think it's sort of like a Band-Aid on something that's really hemorrhaging, that it's not good enough. I understand the purpose of it. I don't want us to portray it as something it's not, because it can't fix this issue. Not that I see Ivy giving me the stare of death. It's not going to.
I don't think Lisa's suggesting that it's going to fix the issue. I think what she's saying is that when we pulled back our moratorium and now development is allowed in the rest of the hamlet, and we understand that we're only doing North Greeley, and you've got the rest of the hamlet that who knows when might get folded into the form-based district, or might not. I think it's right to clean it up.
So if I may, this is addressing the existing zoning districts and affordability is separate and apart from a direction for the form-based code, unless you're going to apply the direction that you're applying to the form-based code to the rest of the, right? I mean, it's all kind of the same questions.
Well, right now, I mean, the way the current FBC is happening is that it's still being studied for the entire 72 acre district. So whatever affordability is put into the form-based code, if it's wherever it's adopted, that would then be a part of the code. But I'm saying if there's an area where it's not initially adopted, that's at least we would then have put that zoning requirement in the current zoning.
Yeah, so currently the code as it exists today requires affordable units in the MFRC district. For 5 to 9 units, they're required to do 1 unit of affordable. For 10 or more, it's 10%. I think it should be a pretty simple fix to simply add that same requirement to the BR and BRP districts to include the rest of the hamlet, if that's the direction that the board wants to take. Currently, that's sort of separate and apart from the form-based code process, but that's something that we can undertake now.
Right. Is that where the board wants to go? Do you want to add a workforce component, a one-on-one, to that basic affordable statute?
Sorry, we want to do whatever has been done for the rest of the town. What Jen's referencing has occurred in the MFRC. Did I get it right?
Right, but what Jen is referencing is the multifamily residential, when all residential is built in the Chappaqua Hamlet. Okay, 91 Bedford is mixed use. It is not all residential. If 91 Bedford came in as all residential, it would have come in under the MFRC and would have been required to have affordable units. Because of the first floor retail, it does not. If ever that applicant was to come back to change the first floor commercial use to residential, there would be application of affordable units in there, because there is no 100% affordable dwelling in our hamlet, or affordable. There is no one completely residential unit in the Chappaqua Hamlet that does not have an affordable component. It's either commercial and residential, or a completely residential with affordable requirement.
Right, but by applying the current affordability requirements to the BR and the BRP districts, we would be filling in that missing link, so that when there is a project that has commercial on the first floor and residential above, they would be subject to the affordable housing requirements to provide either 1 unit if you're 9 or less, or 10% if you're 10 or more units.
Right.
That doesn't solve the form-based code question. We still have to answer this.
Right. This is just separate.
This is separate and apart from.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jill, I think that, to your point, I think what we're asking for is what Jennifer described, bringing us to the county standard for all residential, for all properties that include residential unit construction.
Right, but retail first floor. Or,
in the BR and BRP zoning districts, you would like to see an affordability requirement.
But I think that, Jill, you're asking about the workforce requirement, and I think that we need to kind of understand that a little bit better.
Okay.
Well, now, I mean, we should do what Lisa's suggesting, and we should shift and now have the conversation about what we want to see in the form-based code.
And should I take this conversation to be a direction to my office to prepare that local law for an upcoming agenda?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as soon as we can, plug that hole, we should. Good.
Sabrina, I have a question about, so I apologize if I'm such a rookie here with area median income and the percentages. So it's 2 parts. As it relates to workforce housing and affordability, so like affordability, meaning like people have a certain income level and that's how they qualify.
Right, there's a couple different levels of it within the area median income that classify as affordability.
Okay.
You're 30%, you're 20% of the area median income, you're 30% of the area median income, and it goes up to 80% of the area median income. I'm not as involved with what is considered a workforce, because in the past the town has used within that AMI as workforce.
Okay, and then yep, now I get it.
I don't know if workforce is 120% of AMI. I don't know that.
Right. And then my next question is, was there, I think the feedback that I've received from some residents was a component of for senior housing. How would that fit in? Would this fit in this model, or would it be a totally separate discussion?
I'm not sure that senior housing in your code today, you have provisions for senior housing,
Okay.
separate and apart from income, I guess.
Okay.
But is it a requirement for any new residential or combination commercial, retail residential to have any kind of senior dedicated housing?
You can do a 55 and older. You can do senior living as a requirement.
I know that there's just been feedback about how, whether it's grandparents, folks who currently have, I mean, I think the population of Newcastle, 56% are empty nesters. I'm not sure of that percentage who are considered seniors. But I've received feedback about just how, grandparents want to be in Chappaqua, but can't afford to live here. And especially because they don't want a single family home because it's just either one or two of them. So I'm not sure if that is something that would be considered under this piece of legislation, or would it be something separate, Jen?
It sounds like it's sort of two different concepts.
Okay.
One, diversifying your housing stock to allow for opportunities for those empty nesters to have something other than a single family home to move to, whether it's a townhouse, a condo, an apartment, whatever it may be. And I think part of the goals of the form-based code here is to diversify your housing stock that's available to your residents and those that want to come into the community. I think the other prong of that, when you're talking about empty nesters or older generations, is restricting the occupants to those that are 55 and over, or I think or 65 and over, I think is the other threshold. There are two exceptions to the Fair Housing Act where through zoning, you can limit the ages of the people that live within the dwelling units. And that's for senior living. Typically that's going to apply to the whole development though, not just individual units. So I think you're accomplishing, by diversifying your housing stock, you're accomplishing part of what your residents are expressing the need for.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Jen, in the condos that are behind Walgreens, there are certain apartments there, certain units that are senior price. They first have to be advertised to seniors for a certain period of time. If there are no takers, then they can be purchased by anyone. And there's like a deed restriction on them.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not familiar
That's
with
an MFRC.
Okay.
That is an MFRC, and within the MFRC, there are incentives. There were incentives to increase density, some of which were restricted to senior living and affordable housing.
Okay.
And yes, they are deed restricted because that is the only way to ensure that they continue to be in compliance with the approval.
My closing statement on this would be that whatever the relative maximum you could do for affordable and workforce is something that I would support. And when I mean maximum, it has to be economically viable, that someone is going to want to build and then accept that affordable and workforce housing, make it work for them financially. And to my point before is, no one objects to changing the code, but if we're not doing anything that's encouraging people to build to allow these types of units to come, then we're just again, sticking a Band-Aid on something, we're not really going to fix the issue. I mean, nominally, I guess we would in minor cases. But so I would, as the expert here, examples of what can we do in terms of the heights we're allowing and the size of the lots that we have to maximize that workforce and affordable. So I'm open to whatever suggestion you come back with on that front.
Yeah, honestly, I think it will come down to the cost of an affordable unit. I've had conversations with certain developers asking this question, certain folks who work for developers, what is the cost of a unit and how does it compare with the number of allowable units? And, if you look at the affordable the numbers of units. I'm not sure how many are up at the top of King Street. At 14 units with 91 Bedford, to introduce 2 affordable units, it was not cost effective. If you look at Conifer, they're just shy of 30 units. If you look at Chapel Crossing, they're just shy of 30 units. So those are the numbers that we start talking about when we start thinking about making the affordable unit economic, or the affordable units economic. There are 64 total units up at the cupola building. The 28 of them that are affordable are being balanced out by the market rate that are in that building. So the economics of that is important to look into. Given the lack of residential development that it has occurred downtown today, over the past decades, I would tend to guess that at the existing form of development, the height allowances, that it is not economical to do an affordable unit. And again, I'd want to put more analysis behind that, but that's my professional opinion on the direction of that. If you take away the requirement for commercial first floor, are you getting into another aspect that where 1 or 2 affordable units may be doable? I would say yes, but that is it's site specific, but I know that there's a cost that we need to factor in, which is where the incentive structure comes from.
That's helpful. I think that we want to create a system where something will be built. And and finding that right economic model that supports maximal opportunity in housing for affordable and workhouse, while balancing feasibility of actually pursuing a project is important.
Does anyone else have thoughts on this? Okay.
Sabrina, what can you help me to understand, or Jen, can you help me to understand what's the next step here? So I think what you're hearing from us is a willingness to, open up that 10% and not make it strictly affordable, but make it affordable and workforce, but to consider that as a baseline and to come back with recommendations around what an incentive structure might look like for a property owner or developer to go over that 10% county model ordinance. So who then is going to come up with what those potential incentives are? Is that you guys, or is that Kimley Horn, or what's the next step here?
Brina may be able to better answer that question, but my belief is that it would be Kimley Horn. It would be
that's part of
you're
responding to the
yeah.
DGEIS. You are providing direction to Kimley
Right.
Horn to come back with some answers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
The next item on your list is landmarks and historical properties. And, today in the code is, construction related to anything that is a landmark has to be referred to the Landmark Advisory Committee. And then the Landmark Advisory Committee makes comment regarding the application. The draft really remains silent on this and does not change the existing process. You have gotten, as part of the public comments on this, a list of properties that people wish to be made landmarks. The proposed action is to leave it as it is today. If the town board determines that a property should be a landmark, then it goes through a separate process or an additional process when it comes up for development.
I agree with the suggested approach for this.
Me too.
I'm fine with it.
Sorry. Can you just remind me, if we landmark a building, are there any requirements in terms of restricting building on that site? Because I know, for instance, like the former, the fire station on Center Street is like primed to be turned into something great. But like by landmarking it, does that put any restrictions on either interior or exterior renovations?
I can't answer whether there's any restrictions. It requires a review by the Landmarks Advisory Committee that will look at the redevelopment plans and try and retain the historical value of
But
the
do they
building.
have any teeth,
But they have
or is
no
it
right
just a
to-
recommendation?
No.
It's just a
Yes,
recommendation.
Just a recommendation. It's very different from New York City landmark or New York State landmark.
Any thoughts?
And the other thing is with the local landmark, it's with the owner's consent. So, okay.
Right,
the
you
owner
just
has to buy
had
into
one
it.
for
Yeah.
the community center that came before you, which is town owned. The landmarks committee will work with property owners if they're targeting buildings, and it has to come to your board to designate.
I think we're all saying we're comfortable with this
Okay.
recommendation.
Yeah,
That was easy.
yeah.
We thought we'd throw in a couple of easy ones. The next one is a little more difficult. It's about building height. The existing code has 2 and 3 stories at 35 feet, and there's a formula for calculating the height based on elements like midway to the peak of the roof from the ground. The proposed code did a story height of 2 to 5 stories, depending on where you were within the form-based district, where a story, a first floor residential was 11 feet 6 inches, and a first floor commercial was 16 feet. The comments regarding this, that there should be no 5 stories and no more than 3 stories in the rest of the, in the form-based code area. The recommendation is to remove the 5-story reference, main 4 stories based on the market scan and the discussion that served as the basis for creating the draft code, and maintain the new definition of height and specifications regarding the height of the building within the draft code. Any thoughts on that?
Sabrina, does the draft code, I'm thinking that it doesn't differentiate between the east and west side of North Greeley.
It does not.
That might be something that I would like to consider.
And actually, to extend on Lori's comment there, I've been pretty vocal about this in all the public hearings. I think that the location of these 4-story buildings is really imperative. Like, I fundamentally am comfortable with 4 stories on North Greeley, or even like a 4-story, or the 3 stories with a 4-story, or a 4th story setback. But I personally, and from the feedback that I hear from folks as it relates to being like in the heart of downtown, like, I think maintaining where we're at today is appropriate for the hamlet. So I think it depends on where we are in the hamlet as it relates to how many stories we should go. But I also want to just level set a little bit, Sabrina, as it relates to just the heights of these floors. So as the code exists today, you're saying the height maximum for the 3-story is at 35 feet.
Correct.
So am I doing the math right, that if it was 4 stories, it would be about 46 feet high?
Correct.
Okay. But it would be because another thing that's interesting about our landscape are the slopes, and the way things are slanted? Because I got to tell you that building where Talbot's is that 3 or 4 stories? Because
That
sometimes
is
I
a
can't
4-story.
tell.
Under the new code, the proposed code, that would be a 4-story building.
Okay, so but whatever I
and it
drive
has
by
to
it,
do-
it doesn't seem like a 4-story building to me. So, okay, so like, does the new code address that issue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and it counts that bottom floor that has partial exposure.
Mhm.
Depending on how exposed that bottom floor is, it will count as a story.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, and there's a difference in that first floor height as to whether or not it's residential versus commercial.
And just out of curiosity, if you know off the top of your head, because I'm really impressed by how you regurgitate all the codes, on Highland Avenue, where those condos exist, how many stories is that?
Those today meet the 30, actually, I don't know, because those condos are not, they're in the MFRC, which is an overlay district which may have allowed different height allowances.
Interesting.
I can tell you, hang on a second. Let me find my paper. So in my calculations, a 4-story residential under the proposed code would be 46.4 feet tall. A 5-story is 58 feet tall. A 4-story with commercial would be 50.8 feet tall. So you're comparing a 46.4 is residential to a 50.8.
Okay.
Let me see if I have, let's see.
So the difference between the 4-story commercial and the residential is like the height of my 8-year-old, basically. I think.
Right.
That could be different in another 6 months.
I know.
I like that math, Lori. It's easy for me now.
Yeah, I really appreciate the math. It's really important.
Right. And then I'm just trying to think, because we did some height analysis comparing Conifer with 91 Bedford. And under the new code, those would be 4-story buildings. With 91 with the commercial on the first floor, and then Conifer all residential.
So while you're looking,
And the apartments on Highland?
I didn't do the analysis of the apartments on Highland.
so to answer the question in terms of heights, are you sorry? Are you done, Lauren? I mean, Lauren, are you done? Okay. So in reference to heights, I have no objection to 4 stories on North Greeley. The issue I have, I think Corey was hinting to, was west and east side being different. While 149 King has been a big flashpoint, and rightfully so, they don't want to have their view shed and blocked out, and they don't want to have a building immediately adjacent to them. I will add, as this conversation has gone on, and I think it's important to note that developers built that building, and there was other smaller units there before them that they look over now. So, it was good before. It doesn't mean it has to be good now, but I think we have to be cognizant that this all works together and everyone needs to try to work it out. But that being said, I do want to support and protect that community. I'm going to say community, that development right there. And I would be in favor of limiting the east side to 3 stories. And for reference point, I believe, Sabrina, if you're going down Lower King, the last building right before the chain link fence and the train tracks that's a 4-story building, if I'm not mistaken, or
Correct.
the equivalent of a 4-story building.
Correct.
So I think for perspective, okay, so people should understand, it sounds frightening and scary, but what's really works, at least for the North Greeley corridors, places on the west side have parking accessible already. They have the ability to park cars. So I think if we're looking at the bigger municipality, I think four stories is appropriate in other areas. But since we're dealing with the form-based code, east and west, I think should be differentiated.
Yeah, I hesitate, Sabrina. We've the way that this is being sort of described, it's we have the regulating plan, which is block by block, and I think it's important for us to continue to think about things on a block by block basis, because what's appropriate on one side of North Greeley may not be appropriate on the other side of North Greeley. What's appropriate on North Greeley may not be appropriate on Lower King, may not be, so I think we have to continue to think about it in terms of that regulating plan that thinks about things block by block. That said, I am comfortable with the idea of maintaining 4 stories in those areas where it's currently proposed today. I'm concerned that dropping it down to 3 stories will make development not profitable and will result in a code that doesn't lead to anything getting built. And so I think to accomplish the community's goals that we set out for ourselves, that we need to continue to consider 4 stories. That said, I think some good questions were raised during the public hearing process with regard to whether a 3-story building in certain locations could be profitable. I am not satisfied with the way that information's been presented today in the market scan. I don't feel that I have the information that I need to be able to verify, prove or disprove that notion that 3 stories can be profitable. And so, when it comes to the question of east side versus west side of North Greeley, I understand the reasons to go to 3. And if that's a location I'd be willing to consider going to 3. But I'd like to understand better whether or not that's profitable. And so, whether that means that Kinley Horn simply needs to take the data that they already have as a result of that market scan and put it forward in a way that's understandable and compelling and gets me to a higher degree of confidence than what I have today. I don't know what the answer is there, or if there's additional work that needs to happen in order for them to analyze that question more thoroughly. I don't know what the answer is, but
Well, and
for
I
me,
also
I don't want to say, oh, 4 stories is off the table. I think we need to hold on to 4 stories because everything that I have heard to date suggests that we don't get anything done unless we allow 4 stories.
right, and I think that your affordability discussion plays into this, to be quite honest with you, because there are costs that are automatically kind of taken off the top, and it gets to that affordability issue. And so, Ivy, what I hear you saying is you need more analysis of the 3 versus 4 with all of the costs, affordability, parking associated with it. Does everybody feel that same way? Because this is a direction for Kinley Horn to provide more analysis.
I mean, I think we definitely need more analysis from Kinley Horn, and I've seen, I think they, just from looking at the numbers they provided, I think they really did understate significantly, like rents being charged in some of the buildings, like the 91 Bedford that was just built at 3 stories. And I know Pleasantville just built a building in town with 3 stories and affordability, and that was built, and I think is all rented or will be all rented. So I definitely think we need more information. That being said, I really don't want 4 stories, and I certainly don't want them by in front of 149 King and their view shed. If the planning board is involved in everything, which it should be, then potentially that's something that if it's 3 stories and 4 stories makes sense in one spot, and we can get something out of that, and it makes sense for everyone from both a view shed perspective, from the feel of the town, everything else, and the planning board significantly involved, that there may be a case for a 4-story building, but I don't think it should be allowed as of right.
You know, it's funny. I was going to come from a little bit different perspective. I was going to say that if there's a 3 stories, which is allowed by right now, then I think we should remove the planning board when we're talking about those small 0.1, 0.1, 0.2 lots, and go back to the 0.5 threshold. Because if you can't go really above what you're doing now, and you're still can't go lot line on lot line, what are we doing here? We're doing nothing. We're spinning our wheels and throwing the planning board again, and defeats the purpose of everything. So again, we'll have this conversation, or the next town board will have this conversation in a dozen years about what are we going to do. Let's change the zoning, because it'll have zero value. Not zero, but it'll have limited value.
Arguably, it has limited value now, honestly, but yeah, that's, I think that you can always have taller buildings if the planning board's involved with a variance, if it makes sense for use, if parking makes sense, depending what's going in there. Traffic can be different depending on the use of the building, as may parking requirements be different depending on the use of the building. So that's why I think it could be allowable if they want to put in more affordable in their building. Then maybe in certain situations and spaces it makes sense, but that can be in our hands to determine how we can help to craft that.
What we've seen in other communities is an additional story or an additional half story, like a stepped back story, by special permit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's maybe one mechanism to consider, as long as they meet X, Y, and Z standards, and there's not going to be an impact on the community, then they can go up to that additional height.
Right, exactly.
I'm curious, when you have a step back height, Sabrina, generally speaking, how much does that differentiate in terms of the angle? I guess it really depends where you're on the street, but how much does it differentiate that view shed and impact?
Depends where you are looking at it.
Yeah, and the step backs are usually more so beneficial for like the pedestrians, because as you're walking along the sidewalk, if you have a stepped back top floor or top 2 floors, a lot of it kind of fades from view.
Right.
Think
There's
of Lower
really
King.
not a provision for the rear of properties. I mean, you can create a provision for the rear of properties, but
So Lower King, so when you're walking down the street, so you don't get, they call it the canyon effect, with the buildings right on top of you, where you step them back so that there's more light and air circulating for that street, as opposed to like a 149 King, where the east side of the street, they're afraid that, that's going to be too close to them. And might I just suggest something else? Because I don't know that we know the answer to this. I know that Sabrina just asked you, how about additional studies? I don't know that we need additional studies.
well,
I think perhaps what we need to do is take a look at the studies that were done already and see whether or not the information might be presented in a more complete and comprehensive manner before we authorize or direct Kimley Horn for additional studies.
right. It's a matter of, there were a lot of comments regarding this particular topic and detailed comments that the consultant team needs to respond to and, determine, whether or not that analysis that they, in relation to the comments, is enough or not. So there's more work to be done here. The one thing that, wasn't very detailed in the DGEIS was the affordability and the cost of that affordable unit. That is something that I think has to play into this as well.
And they
But
definitely.
I just feel like it's really important for us to reconnect with the fact of why we're doing this, right? Like we're not only trying to, protect view sheds and so on. We have actual goals that we've stated with regard to wanting to incentivize redevelopment within the hamlet. And so, we can't just institute a code that keeps everything at exactly the same, level of density that exists today, because we're not going to get there then. We're not going to see anything happen. And if nothing happens, then we're back to where we are today, and we continue to see the sort of decline that we see right now. So to my mind, it feels like it's important for us to maintain that 4th story, because we are trying to incentivize revitalization of a hamlet through this code.
I think that's fair, and I would double down and say that's why I think that we shouldn't be sitting vacant parking lot. But that ship has sailed. I think the parking lot should be part of the form-based code too. But it takes courage to do that, and it takes people to buy in and realize that the sky isn't falling, that we can't stand still, and sort of dictate what we want so that it can't be overrun. But
So
is what
if
it
I
is. North Greeley and what we can do.
So let me remind you, this is about the entire study area, right? Including the parking lot. It's removing the 5th story in that parking lot. It's reducing that down to 4 stories and maintaining the height of 4 stories where it is maintained today. There are areas where 3-story height is maintained.
That's right, but I'm talking about just in terms of implementing a code. We're doing a study, that's correct, but it's not the code. And that should not be lost on anyone, despite what may say. It absolutely is not the code. We are not implementing the form-based code and rezoning the parking lot to build 4-story buildings or a new community center or green spaces. We're doing nothing there.
Anyone else have any thoughts regarding this matter? Okay. The next element is parking. So based on so there's the existing code, and in the existing code, residential in a business district is 1 space per unit plus 1/3 of a space per bedroom. If it is retail or a service business, it is 1 space for each 150 square feet on the ground floor and 1 space for each 225 square feet on other floors. And that's business or professional office space is 1 space for each employee, but not less than 1 space for each 250 square feet. So parking spaces are not required to be provided in the business retail parking district. Okay. Under the proposed code, there were revised ratios that reduced the existing parking ratios based on the world today. What's in the existing code is antiquated. So pre-pandemic, that ratio was based on what was happening today in the realm of what transportation engineers were recommending. So it was really essentially a ratio update based on today's uses. What the proposed code introduced was a parking toolbox. Getting back to the point that this is supposed to create a walkable community, there were different qualifiers in a parking toolbox to incentivize development, in regards to walkability. If you could work a deal with your neighbor who has a huge parking lot and you showed an agreement, you could count that as your parking. Comments that we received on the proposed code was that there was not enough parking required, that, on the one hand. On the other hand, we received comments such as consider credits for car share services in place of constructed parking spaces. There was also a lot of conversation about garages, and nobody wanted a garage. The recommended strategy was to leave the parking ratios as they were proposed in the draft code, maintain the parking toolbox, and introduce to that toolbox a card share service as long as there was a deed restriction to a certain number of apartment units that they could not own cars. Does anyone have any comments about that? That was a lot of information.
I like the recommendation. I agree with you. And I would just hope, though, that as Kimberly Horn is preparing the response to the public comments that we received on these questions, that they'll be more fleshed out, that there'll be more meat on the bones here. but in general, in theory, I like it.
Do merchants know that we're cutting their parking by like 50%? Aren't we? I think we are. I think we should talk to them about that. I don't know. To me, this seems.
Where did you come up with that? How did you
I
calculate?
think I remember seeing it somewhere as part of that. It's part of that toolbox, I believe.
No, merchants.
I can look at it again, but
Well, I think that's
I think by
qualify.
I think by significantly reducing this parking, I'm concerned, we don't have enough parking as it is in town. And I think if we're saying we're going to be bringing more apartments, I know we want it as a walkable community, but I think it's unrealistic to think people are not going to need to leave Chappaqua at some point and they may want a car. So I think you're going to end up getting developers who say they can't abide by the deed restrictions because nobody will take the apartments without a car. And I think that, we're not requiring enough. And to say people can walk, what is it like? People can provide a shuttle to take them off site up to like a mile or something to get back to their, I think it's going to be really just, I think developers are going to find this really difficult for the marketability of their developments, that people will be unable to have a car. Now, it may be post-COVID that people aren't shopping as much personally, but I think they are still driving. So I'm concerned that this is significantly too low and will pose a problem later on with development, if that's the point of this.
My response to that in part, I'm not aware, or maybe I missed it, the 50% reduction in merchant parking. But that being said, I see Joel shaking your head. I've never seen that.
I'd love to see where it said that, because
So before we start making that
would be news to us.
public as the word, what's happening, let's make sure that's accurate. Number one. Number two, I think that when we look at this holistically, again, I'll go back to what I said before, when it comes time to someone have courage in the community, I think to hopefully rally around this, and with this charrette, which is a great term we like using now for public land, we look at the parking lot and we say, that is invaluable. And when that should be tied to any future development, so that when there are 3 or 4 story buildings elsewhere that can't accommodate parking, that we can have a huge parking lot that can, and have other massive benefits for this community and be on the tax roll as opposed to just be vacant land. So I think we have to realize it's going to be a holistic view to this. No one's going to build out South Greeley Avenue to a huge development if they can't find parking along with the help from the community. So I think we're scaring ourselves with things that are just never going to happen. There is a marriage between public and private partnership.
Right.
It will be very difficult for people to take full advantage of the code. For example, to build 50 or 49 units in a 4-story area if you don't provide parking. I've had applicants come to me already showing me beautiful buildings, and my question is, where's your parking? Because they have to provide the parking. It will stop a lot of development because there's just not the area within the existing lot lines to provide the parking. It's like the affordability, it's a cost.
Right. And Sabrina, I think that
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Lori. I apologize.
it's okay. I want us, as we talk about this parking question, to really recognize that parking has been a tool for redlining, right? That the parking restrictions have been tools that municipalities have used to prevent multifamily housing. And we really should be sensitive to this and recognize that that's an obstruction that we could put in place to prevent multifamily housing in Newcastle. And I personally don't want to be responsible for that historic tool to prevent housing diversity to be employed in our zoning.
So with the parking toolbox, that is the release valve to being more flexible with parking. The consultant team, the traffic engineer, reduced our parking requirements based on what is going on in other municipalities and the uses today, okay? That considered online shopping, it considered all of those things pre-pandemic that we still deal with today, okay? So our ratios were updated to reflect the world today versus 1970, okay? The parking toolbox adds the opportunity without doing a deeper dive into town resources. Today, in your BRP zone, anything on Greeley, there's no parking requirement for residential units because they are in the parking district, regardless if you're putting in a restaurant or you're putting apartments in. If they are zoned BRP, you can park in the town lots. And there's no question. With the parking toolbox, you are making sure that the people who own a place to park them. But you're also providing the flexibility that it doesn't have to be on the same property as the building. I think that that's really important to understand. And if you incorporate share service, let's say a car share service consisting of 5 cars will equate to 10 units of deed restricted that cannot own a car. You're saving on 5 parking spaces because of that car share service. And it is completely a perspective of that developer. If they can't fit the parking, they can't develop the property. If they don't want to take advantage of the toolbox, then they still can't develop the property. They have to demonstrate that parking is satisfied.
So Sabrina, what if they can develop the parking but don't want to?
You have to develop the parking.
Okay. So
there's a lot of things they don't want to do.
I know. I'm just trying to understand, like, we're giving flexibility to resolve the parking question, but, we don't want to give so much flexibility that, that it can get punted.
The only flexibility you have is within that toolbox, right?
So can we use, can we use a Red A property as an example, which,
yes,
is of a size that I would imagine could accommodate parking?
He cannot put 49 units on that site at 4 stories because he did not plan for parking.
He doesn't want to do that anyway, but can I just get back to the parking for a second? Because I remember where I saw that.
I'm sorry, wait, what was that last thing?
I was recalculating I remember where I got the thing with the merchants. I was looking at the ratios, the new ratios that are proposed, and I could be wrong, but by my calculations, because like, let's say the retail, I think it's like under 10,000. It was like 2.8 per 1,000 square feet, and now it's going to be less. The way I looked at it, it constructively reduces the required parking for retail buildings by approximately 50%. So Sabrina, you can talk to the impact of those ratios probably better than I can. That's
right. It's not 50%. It's like, with the difference between 0.2 and 0.4.
I don't know. I would look at that again. I think it's about 50%, or in
Did
some
we
cases.
receive a public comment on that? Is
25%.
there something that you're referring to that we could all?
I was trying to,
There has been no
back of
public
the
comment
envelope trying to
that's specific.
calculate the, I could be wrong, but I just did back of the envelope trying to calculate these ratios here.
Yeah.
For a 2-bedroom apartment, right, under today's code, you would need 1.6. So you need per bedroom. Well, you need 1 for the
I'm talking about
apartment.
retail.
So retail, it's either today is number of employees or number of square feet, whichever is greater.
Right.
Okay. And what would it be under the code, Sabrina?
Under the proposed code, Retail less than or equal to 10,000 square feet is 2.8 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Greater than 10,000 square feet, it's 4 per 1,000 square feet. If it is office, it's 8 per 1,000 square feet, and medical is 3.3 per 1,000 square feet.
You know, it would be helpful for me at least to get something either from the consultants or someone in our staff who could really
It would be
calculate
from the
based
Where are you
on
getting this
based
from? I'm
on like
confused.
current can you not hear me? Based on current storefronts, how that would impact each store, the current zoning, and then the proposed zoning. That would be really helpful to me because my math may be wrong. I
Yeah,
went
but you
to
have to
Harvard a very
understand,
long
in
time
the
ago.
BRP zoning district right now, whether you have an office or a restaurant, you don't have to apply for that parking. You don't have to do parking because you're in the parking district.
Right, and we give each merchant 7 parking passes for free. If they can just, show us that they got up to, 7 employees. The parking for that merchant parking area is what it is, whether or not there's a restaurant there or a shoe store or a card store. That merchant parking is finite. We don't, we don't limit it. We
I
don't tell
wasn't
you.
really talking about employees, but
Well, Lisa,
it would be
everybody's
super
parking in the same
helpful if you
place.
could provide a graph or some kind of chart, Sabrina. So we can
Well,
analyze
that would be a request of the consultant team.
either one, yeah.
Okay, but could you just explain to me what is it you're looking for?
I want to understand, forget housing for a minute. I want to understand how the change in parking ratios is going to impact current merchants.
Current merchants?
Or merchants in general. The way I read it, it's getting reduced. So I
Yeah,
may
there
be
is a
wrong, but I
reduction.
want to understand that. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to look at the ratios and understand it. It's easier if there can actually be a demonstration of how those are applied.
So let me try and rephrase this. You're looking for a comparison of commercial parking requirements from today compared to what is proposed.
Yes.
Thank you, Sabrina. And Sabrina, I guess this would be for retail outside of the parking district?
Well, it's going to be for commercial use outside of the parking district.
Right, not in the parking district. Okay.
Well, yeah. Well, yes, because you're not messing with the BRP zone right now.
Right. Okay.
But isn't the form-based code being looked at for the whole downtown? This is what I don't understand. We're talking about the form-based code. We are currently studying the entire 72 acres downtown, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So to say it's not going to be applied there is disingenuous because it could be applied there. That's why we're studying it.
Well,
So
why
to say
wouldn't you?
it's only good, let me finish, please. To say we're only applying it on North Greeley in one particular area, so it's not going to impact anyone, is not true because it could. That's what we're studying. If we were only studying it, let's say on North Greeley, then I would agree. It's not going to impact the other areas because it's not being studied there. But in my view, the way it works is that we're studying the entire form-based code. Any board could turn around and say it's been studied. Now let's apply it here.
So let's just talk about a second here. In the BRP zoning district, there is a parking ratio, but it's waived because of their location within the parking district. So in response to your question, if we were to apply the proposed parking ratio and compare it to what's there today, it would be a huge increase because they're going to be required to create parking. I believe that there are provisions within the draft code that if you are not changing your building, you are still can take advantage of parking the way you have it. But if you redevelop and rebuild and go up in height and create new uses, you then have to satisfy parking.
Okay.
But in the
But that's not
BR,
reducing parking.
in the BR zone, you have a parking requirement
Mm-hmm.
that has been slightly reduced in the new code to keep up with today's standards.
I mean, the bottom line is this does not happen without public land. When you say, Lisa, that this might as well be the whole area because someone can just implement it. If there is no public land in this equation, there is no holistic form-based code for the entire hamlet, a 72-acre hamlet. It just can't happen. It doesn't. It will not happen. So you know, we're placing these. I'm mumbling. The bottom line is it's not happening without the public land. So I don't see why we're making this bigger than it is.
I remain very concerned about parking because, we're also saying, we're talking about the chap line too, and we're saying, okay, at the bottom of the chap line, we're not going to require a parking lot. We're just going to let people park on Bischoff and everywhere else. So now we're going to add that. And now we're adding new buildings and we don't necessarily have parking. I think it's going to be a mess. I think we need to just look at this a little more, and I'd like it studied a little more.
Well, the consultants are answering those questions. They're going to come back to us
Right.
on the issue. So it's this right now, we're just discussing sort of moving a ball forward as opposed to just being stagnant with this. We're not reaching a conclusion today.
Well, I'm comfortable with the recommendation that for the parking ratios as they currently are drafted in this recommendation that you have here, Sabrina, with opening up the parking toolbox further. I know that you say that people commented that there wasn't enough parking. We also received comments that the ratios that we have in our plan are too onerous. We also had folks weigh in that, we should be dropping those requirements further. And in particular, those comments came from people who, to Lori's point, were housing advocates. So, I think we need to be mindful, again, of keeping in mind that, I'm getting tired, that overarching goal of what we're trying to accomplish here with regard to incentivizing development.
I agree with your suggested approach here too, Sabrina. And as it relates to parking, I know it seems as though there's not enough parking in the hamlet. I think what folks have to understand is that there's parking in the back parking lot, there's parking at the train station available, or there's parking, now there's more parking spots actually because of the streetscape renovation. There's more on-street parking, correct, Jill?
Yes, lines, right?
Much cleaner, which is lovely, by the way. And I think that what kind of stinks is when you have to walk an extra 5 minutes to your destination. But overall, it provides a healthy environment for folks, to get to where they go to. So again, I know ideally, I wish I could park right in front of Chappaqua Village Market every single day, but I'm not going to. And I'm willing to walk that extra 5 minutes to get there.
Well, but keep in mind too that this code isn't just about the needs of the current residents, right? We've got to consider what the needs are of the future residents. And so, just the same way that the future residents may not have as many school-age children as we do who live in single-family homes in this town, they may not have as many cars as we do either. So, we have to be mindful that we're planning for people who don't live in this community yet because they haven't had the opportunity to do so. Now I'm really getting tired. I'm getting punchy.
If I may, I think that this is a good stopping point. There was one more item on your on your spreadsheet,
Sheet.
on the Excel. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm losing my
Yes,
words too.
she's a little tired too. I think maybe we could
There's
save it
two
for
of
next
them,
Tuesday.
the architectural details and the boundary discussion.
Okay.
So,
can
but
keep-
what I'd like to do, I mean, because you did receive the Excel document, which had some, everything that I've been speaking to you about. If I could ask to add to your sentence homework, to read through those two elements of the architectural detailing and the boundary. And the boundary, there's not a lot of detail because it's really, looking at the map and deciding where you want to draw the line for the application of this phase of the code. Maybe you can provide some of your feelings, another 3 to 5 sentences. So we're talking about 6 to 9 sentences in total. But maybe you can add some of your thoughts in there as well to expedite the conversation on Tuesday.
Mine will be, I agree with
Sorry,
your
thoughts
recommendation.
on what? Sorry.
Any particular font?
Come again?
Never mind. I'm getting punchy too. I said,
Bring it
any-
back.
Yeah, everybody's
No,
had enough.
I'm actually serious. I'm sorry.
What do you want additional thoughts on, Sabrina? What more do you
Well,
want the
we
board?
still have architectural details and we have the zoning boundary
Okay.
to discuss.
Right, we can wait for those on Tuesday. Why don't we take and ask for input on the areas that we've already discussed today, which I think will be helpful for the board to see where the divergence and where the overlap is in people's views. It may be a little bit cleaner if they actually see it in writing. So maybe like a sentence or two on each, and then we'll put it together so that we can see. We'll take and amend the Excel sheet, and then we'll also, discuss the number 6 and number 7. Okay.
Before we leave, I
Sorry,
just
so
want
now
to
you
say,
want us to write a few sentences on each one?
Even
You
the
want
ones
to?
we've already
No one
agreed
take
to?
notes.
No. Obviously, if we've agreed to it, the only thing that I think that we've agreed to is number 4, the landmarks. And I've gotten divergence on parking. I
We
didn't
have
hear from
diversion,
parking.
we've gotten agreement on affordable housing,
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
needing more information, but all the process
so
and the
let's-
public hearing are different.
Let's take, you guys can work offline on that and just, if anybody has anything they want to say on each of those, they can.
Okay.
But let's definitely make sure we send our proposed approach on the public notice and the review process.
At 9 a.m. Okay. Thank you, guys.
I just want to just say one quick thing to be very clear. When I was saying before about my concerns over the plan to rezone for affordable housing in terms of municipality, but my point I was trying to make, if it wasn't overwhelmingly clear, is it's the practical reality of doing so in terms of where we are in our current zoning, in terms of building sites and the ability to build. The practical reality of getting that much more affordable housing, even if we do allow for more, if people aren't building more and expanding their current structures. So that was my point. Not that I oppose the change.
Okay.
That's it. All right. Thank you.
All righty.
Okay.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah.
All
Thanks.
right. Do we have a
everybody.
motion to adjourn our work session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.